committee meeting. I am aware that we've got a couple of councillors arriving, but it is 1 o'clock. We are going to start off, and I will open us up with a karakia. Ki te uru, whakatake hau ki te tonga, kia mākina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E he ake ana o te atukura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei mauri ora. And a translation for that karakia: get ready for the westerly and be prepared for the southerly. It will be icy cold inland and icy cold on the shore. May the dawn rise, red-tipped on ice, on snow, on frost, join, gather, intertwine. So welcome again, everybody. To start off with, we have got apologies from His Worship the Mayor and Councillor David Clendon. Can I please have a mover and seconder? Yep, we've got Collard and Busick, please. Thank you. And I'd like to welcome, we've got 2 deputations for our agenda today. They include Leonie Excel, which is one of our community animal advocates, and we've also got Maho Davis from Te Kotahi Tato Trust, who is a Moeroa community advocate, and we've also got Tina Mahanga. Yes, I know, that's a long time ago, in the room with us as lovely. So I am setting the talking time for the deputation to 5 minutes, but I am willing to, let you go a little over. But yeah, just keep in mind that we've been here all morning, so to the point, it's very helpful to get your message across to the elected members. So I welcome up to the front, Leonie Excel. Thank you. Thanks.
I'll put a little sticky up.
I just have to remind you that we are live streaming, so we may have some people on YouTube listening live, or you'll be able to go back and watch yourself. You can press the replay.
It's always frightening.
And can I just remind those in the room that all your paper rustling and side conversations interfere with the speaker, so please keep quiet. Kia ora, Leonie.
Kia ora. Kia ora, everybody. It's nice to be back here, and very, very nice to be invited to speak at this meeting about the issue of flora and fauna and significance. This is and I see you've got all the papers on it. This is something which I believe we've checked that this appears to be the first time that this issue has come explicitly about dogs and cats and the restrictions on them to elected members. It's something that has gone on in council for about 2 decades, but it hasn't, I don't believe it's been decided upon from the elected members. So from our point of view at the Watchdogs, we are delighted that, that it's reached your ears so that you can now make decisions upon it. Now that it is here, and potentially going from here to council if need be at some point, elected members now need to be aware that you need to either support it or not support it, or support some variation of it going forward. It's our view from the Watchdogs that the current practices are excessive, that they are over-regulation of responsible cat and dog owners, and that has major negative implications for the district and for those of us with either pet dogs or working dogs. So our recommendation to you is to pause the restrictions and bans on dogs and cats while you gather enough facts and information to then make an informed decision. And at the moment, from the material that we have and that you have from this meeting, we don't believe that we have enough information to make good recommendations for change, and we do think that's needed. Okay, so what are the 6 areas? The 6 questions that we have that we currently don't have information on. And the first one is, what's the extent of these bans and limitations? Because there's outright cat and dog bans, and then there's various types of limitations. And if you have a look at the Kiwi map, did anyone see the Kiwi present and high density Kiwi map, and then the predator controlled areas? That covers most of Northland, most of the district. And this is where these bans and restrictions are being implemented. How many properties does that affect? How many people does that affect in our district? It's really important to know. We've been asking since 2018 unsuccessfully, and we'd be very grateful if council could ask for us. The second question is about money. What's the cost to date of the legal battles over this? For example, the Mount Pukaka sawmill 2017, there was a case then, and several other people in that same year, of people objecting to having dogs banned on their property, and they offered alternatives that failed, that they lost. So what's the cost to the council of those legal actions so far in relation to this, and what's the cost likely to be in the future? In addition to that on cost, there's the rates for emissions from the conservation covenants, and one of our members said to me that they saw that there was $100,000. I don't know whether that was in the LTP or proposed LTP or something, but how much is that, and how much is council going to lose because of that? It's another way that dogs are banned. The third thing is a review of the supporting information from DOC. So everybody's got the blurb from DOC in the minutes as an appendix, saying here's all the arguments why you should ban dogs and cats. Now, we believe that some of that information is either false or exaggerated and does not link to the aim, which is to make Kiwis safer, or does not link as well as it should. For example, in 2017, northern brown kiwi were downlisted from endangered to vulnerable, and every year, even the DOC figures say only 12 kiwi in Northland are killed by dogs each year. More are killed by cars each year, and there's about 8,000 of them. So the problem appears to be this huge issue of dogs ravaging kiwi. In fact, it's much smaller than that, and we feel that the policies and practices at the council are really using a mallet to break a walnut, or whatever the cliche is. Okay, so the next question is, what are the likely consequences of banning pets in the district? The intended consequences and the unintended ones. For example, in our group, people are devastated at the idea that they can't subdivide or move because they can't find a property where there isn't a ban where they want to go. People talk about moving out of the district because of that. They're frightened of that, and it's over, like I say, 20 years of bans this is occurring on. What's the impact on housing prices? What's the impact on housing availability? What does it mean for the resident mix in the future up here? What does it mean for our farmers? What does it mean for iwi? What does it mean for hapu? What does it mean for environmentalists? Is that who we're trying to attract to the district? Because people who don't mind a dog and cat ban are likely to be environmentalists. What would a community say if a Kiwi organisation came to them and said, we want to release Kiwi in this fantastic program in your area, and we want to use Operation Nest Egg and gather the eggs and so on? What is that community going to say if they know prior to that occurring that this will lead to high density Kiwi, which in turn will mean that dogs and cats are banned in the future? Will that community really want to support the release of Kiwi if that is going to be the result? So there's all these consequences that need to be thought through and papers given to you guys so that you can make decisions on it, in our view. Okay, the fifth issue is, where does the current practice at FNDC clash with other documents at FNDC or legislation? For example, in the dog management bylaw of 2018, the elected members all voted not to reduce or specify the number of dogs you're allowed per household. And that was done on the basis that the capacity to limit dogs per house is in the Dog Control Act. If they're a hassle where you've got 10 dogs at a house, they're barking and so on, the AMOs can go and animal management officers can go in and deal with that and say, no, you're only allowed 2, you're messing it up. Now we've got a sort of de facto dog and cat ban via this process with the flora and fauna policy and practice note. Maybe there's other implications for other policies within, there's certainly implications for the district plan. That needs to be looked into. And the last thing to consider is what alternatives are there to what you have now? If this is banning dogs and cats across the whole district, which we believe it is, and limiting them to a degree that is unreasonable, what else could be done to serve the same aims, to make sure that Kiwi are okay, at the same time as making sure other flora and fauna is okay and that pets don't have an impact on it? What can we do and what options are available? So in summary, those are the 6 things that we would like you guys to get information on, and please consider and consider pausing these bans and these limitations while you get the information from the Chief Executive to enable you to make a decision on whether this is reasonable or not with all the facts at hand.
Thanks. Thank you, Leonie. Great presentation. Any questions from elected members? No, thank you very much. Do you want to leave your...
I can leave it there.
Yeah, leave it. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, Naho and Tina. Oh, you're going to sit there.
Koutou ngā mihi atu kia koe e kere e tiwa tā ngā kaupapa I tēnei ahi ahi e ino e te kaihanga mihi atu kia koe ngā kai kōrero o te nota, ngā mihi nui, ngā mihi aroha. Just want to acknowledge our Kelly for starting us off, but also you as councillors and the voice that you represent in regard to this region. I feel like I've come in after the shutting the gate after the horses bolted in regard to the warrant of fitnesses and registration kōrero. And I'm here because I think there's a voice that we've missed in the dialogue. And it's not the fault of this council. All you're doing is following around compliance that's set at a national level in regard to vehicle safety. And so you've had to deal with it. Interestingly, the question is, it's the first, we were the only council that hasn't actually actively done something about it. And I'm going to say that there's a reason for that. And that reason is because I think most of the people sitting in this room, we have a whole different demographic. And for us not to actually recognize that we represent an area with the demographic of the haves and the have-nots. And for a lot of the stuff that we're looking at doing in regard to the compliance issues, I'm going to say that it's going to impact on a certain element of that, of our community. And I don't know in the earlier dialogue that if that voice has actually been in the room. In the past, and I've worked in road safety over many years with the late Paddy Few, in regard to trying to work at getting compliance up. Now, again, I'm saying that we know, this council knows, that if you set something at a national standard and you put that across the board, well, one sock does not fit all. And a lot of the issues that you face as a council is trying to get some clarity, getting the right information so that you make decision well when it comes to this region. And I'm talking about this region. And one of the big things for me around a lot of the people that I'm seeing, and one of the jobs I have, I have been working in the last 10 years, is actually in the court system and the justice system. We start to look at a lot of the people that are coming through that I'm saying little things like this, we make decisions that force people into being criminals that aren't bad people. But when you come back to the two worldview of things, that people are forced. I was just talking with my colleague on the way here, that a lot of people, if we look at punishment, if punishment is the thing that brings change, it doesn't work. Why am I saying that? Because if you look at a national level, when we are punishing and the hard sentencing, the prisons were growing. I work in that system. We need to be looking at other alternatives. Why am I here this afternoon? Really, I'm just saying to the council, I think all the dialogue hasn't been on the table for us to really talk about this issue and who it is going to impact mostly. Now, for me, when I saw that, oh, heck, I got my vehicle upgraded because I was behind. But I can do that. I come from a very privileged background in my community because 3 people in my house work. If we look at some of the demographics around a lot of our communities, rural isolation, high unemployment, now these are realities. I hate to talk about our community like that because I think there's so many great things, but I have to be real about our people and some of the decisions that are made that affect those ones that don't have a voice. Even to come to here today, to go through a process like this, to be heard is difficult for a lot of our people because it's not the world they come out of. And yet those are the real people that get affected when we do a simple thing like, oh, we're going to do compliance, and if you're going to, put a fine on, $200 fine, to have insurance. I mean, look at it. I'm lucky because I can afford to get my vehicle looked after, do the things that it needs to. For a lot of people, that's a real life or death situation in regard to the communities they come out of. Living in some of our real isolated communities, getting from A to B, every time they get in their vehicle, they're going to break the law. Not because they want to, but because they look, and we can say, if this was an ideal world, if it was an ideal world, we had high employment, we had a good transport system, we have all the things that other communities have, not a problem. Compliance, I'll be there. But we don't. That's the reality. And all I'm saying to the council today, I know that the trial has started, but I really want to have a look at this. I want to really be about innovation. That's what I want to talk about. Innovation about how do we deal with this problem? How do we look at it so that we don't punish people, good people, and being able to meet some of those compliance issues? I could be cynical and say, well, this could be a revenue gathering exercise from a very cash-strapped council. I'm going to put it out there. And that's already come. You know that. But actually, what I like about this council, and in the past when it stood up, now we have mighty wards, but also in the past when it came to problem gambling and them cutting down on the number of outlets, we've made stands when it came out to affecting certain elements of our community. This council has stood, and that's your job. And I'm here this afternoon really saying that I really would like the opportunity that all the information gets out on the floor. We hear all the voices when we make a decision around enforcing compliance. Because the one sock does not fit all. And I see that every day in the sense of the budgets. I was talking to my colleague on the way here. She was with 3 people today looking at, and we're talking about the working poor. They have jobs, but they struggle to get insurance for their vehicles to pay for the basic necessities. These aren't people that are shirking. And yet this is a demographic of our community that we need to be hearing. And like any what I call a humane society, we need to listen to the voices of the most vulnerable, because the enforcement, I think, and that's why I'm here today, even though you started, they're the ones, even in a month's time, 6 months' time, they're going to be people. They're going to be criminalized. And we've forced this because of compliance. They're not bad people. But when it comes down to survival need stuff, they're going to break compliance to get their children to school, to go and see a health, a medical practitioner, to do the basic things that we do in any rural community in this country. So that's why I'm here this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm really up for the debate. I'm going to finish here. Years ago when Paddy was still alive, we did some innovation, even around road safety, where we defied the I'm going to say Northlands, because it was a different demographic. When you start making things for a different demographic, it doesn't reach everybody. We could see that, so what we did was we did our own billboards, we did our own ads. Can I say when they tested it was one of the most successful campaigns ever run in this region, actually in the country, that hit the demographic. Because why was it? It was developed by our own people, the ones, the target audience were involved in the development of that to be able to do that reach. And I'm saying the same thing again. We need to be innovative. We need to be inclusive. We need to make sure all the players in the room are there so that we can make good decisions. And I think anybody, council, government, whatever, make good decisions when they've got all the information in front of them. So that's just my kororo this afternoon. And thanks again, because I saw it. I contacted Kelly straight away because as I said, I really needed to speak to this, and then she gave me the opportunity to be before you guys this afternoon. So no reira, e kumu roi taku koro i tēnei ata, ahi mate atu e manaki. Kia ora. Any questions?
Kia ora Naho. Councillor Lesich has a question for
you. Naho, I like your kōrero, and you're highly respected and regarded, so I appreciate that you're speaking up on those that feel frightened too. In terms of innovation, one thing I was thinking when you were saying all of that, you shouldn't mention the word innovation because it makes me think, you see, it's dangerous. So, because I understand, Kelly, is that there's given a month to get a warrant. Can we also then maybe in some cases provide a little leaflet which says go here, and the here is say somewhere in where you're from, maybe Mildura or Kawakawa, where somebody could set up get your car and get it to a warrant state, and maybe look at some additional funding, how that can be done. Well, that's the sort of thing.
You're right on the money, and I think they did that in the earlier stage in Paddy. They had a program like that in Kaitaia called Operation Wheels, and that's exactly what you're talking about. And so, if you're going to do this, you need to give some options for people. And then, I don't say I've got the answers. All I'm telling you, these are some of the actual issues. But if we don't identify those issues, we're going to cause more hardship. And I know that this council doesn't want to do that. So that's just, but I say that's the type of thing, but that needs to be a collective dialogue with the right people in the room to be able to get the good options.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I really appreciate both of the speakers coming along today to, one, speak to an item that's in our agenda, but also, Naho, we are in the quiet period of this, so I think it's really insightful information for our staff to hear, and fellow elected members. Deputy Mayor Ann Court, who's on the Regional Transport Committee, I'm sure that was kōrero that you have heard before, and take that into consideration. But I look forward to talking with my fellow elected members about some of the innovation. Probably Chairperson Linda Ward, we can start directing some community board applications to the boards to access funding to help provide some innovative solutions to compliance around compliant vehicles. Thank you. Now we're going to move on. You're welcome to stay. We're going to move into Chairperson's announcements, and I personally don't have any, but I'm going to welcome through Dean Rochelle to do an update on animal shelters.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Friday we see...
Leonie might want to stay for that.
We see the opening of the Northern Animal Shelter, which is a great milestone in the history of this council. We, in Kaitaia, Rochelle will share with the committee some of the images. Invitations have been sent out for the opening, which is at dawn blessing of the new facility up north on Friday morning. Without further ado, I'll hand to Rochelle to share some of the information on the northern and a little bit of information also on the southern.
Kia ora, thank you. So I haven't shared too many slides with you of our new shelter in Kaitaia, because I know that you have all received your invitation, so I'm hoping that you will come up to the opening of the shelter on Friday. So this is a picture of the outside of the new shelter in Kaitaia, and the next one, Malema, is, it does seem a bit far away, but this is sort of a look on the from the other side of the shelter. So you can sort of see coming along this side is our outdoor area, where we've got 12 new kennels and 3 outdoor areas for them to exercise in. And inside the main building, from the first slide, there are 8 further kennels, 2 separate blocks of 4. Inside is a vet room. There's also an office block, a lunch area, and a receiving area, which is that main front bit inside, so they can drive in and safely take dogs through. There's also a separate room for food preparation, and a room set up will be excuse me, for puppies and things that you can sort of warm up if there's any animal that is in need. So it's future-proofing requirements that may come through in years to come. So we're super excited. The team's really, been looking forward to this for a very, very long time. And so we're really looking forward to the opening, and hopefully all of you can make it up there and have a good look around. So for the southern shelter, just a quick update on where we are with that. We have got resource consent come through from both Far North District Council and NRC. Our building consent is currently just on hold at the moment, working through some requests for further information. And we are hoping to start that build in September, looking for a sort of a 9-month, and hopefully would have a second shelter operational by July next year. With the opening of the new Kaitaia shelter, we will be stopping working at our temporary shelter in Horiki. It was always our intention to only have that as a temporary basis until we had another shelter that was up. That's the next slide. Thank you, Marlema. And that's the next one. So Horiki will have no dogs going into the shelter from the end of this month. So any dogs that are currently in there will either just sort of be transferred up through to Kaitaia, or will work their time once they're cleaned and everything like that, or adopted out. And we'll start decommissioning this shelter as soon as the dogs are sort of out there, and hope to be gone from site and back to sort of conditions of the contract within a couple of months, once we start taking down all the materials and things. So that's where we are at.
Hey, does anybody have any questions on those items? I understand, Leonie, you have been invited.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, and good on you. It looks fantastic. What a delight.
It'll look even more delightful. Rochelle was held a lot of the images because she was trying to surprise us.
Distant shots.
Yeah. Any other announcements from Rochelle? No. Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
yes.
Some of us have conflicting diary appointments on Friday, so we won't be able to make the meeting. We'll be there with you in spirit, we're not here physically. But will there be an opportunity, once it becomes, I know it becomes a challenge once it's operational, that we can go back and have a look?
Certainly, Madam Chair, we'll arrange a time that suits those councillors who aren't able to attend on Friday to have an escorted tour of the facility.
Wonderful, thank you.
Have we been circulated that invitation yet?
I believe my invitations have gone out. I can check on that, Madam Chair,
Yes.
but my understanding is that they have gone out.
Yeah, I got mine. It went to everyone as far as before. Oh, it's a TBC. So maybe it just needs to be updated.
Confirmation, so I'll make a note.
Thank you very much for that update on the shelter. I think that we move now on to confirmation of previous minutes. May I please have a mover and seconder? And Councillor Collard. Any amendments in those minutes? No? All those in favour?
Aye.
We are on to item 5.1, the District Services Monthly Business Report. And the recommendation is that the Regulatory Compliance Committee receive the report, District Services Monthly Business Report for May 2021. Can I have a mover and seconder for that report? Councillor Court and Councillor Collard. And there may be points that members wish to raise throughout this report. Anyone want to go? You have to see
Chair, thank you. Just a bit of context for this report. It's the first time that this report appears on the agenda of Regulatory and Compliance Committee. We will bring the most recent report to committee, depending on closing dates, etc., and timing of agendas. We also circulate this and post the report to our website. So it is available generally to yourselves as elected members and also to the public. It contains the information, as the report suggests, it's a monthly report, so it's the information for that particular month. We've tried to make it interesting in terms of statistics and graphical information, etc. So welcome to, open it to any questions, Madam Chair, because happy to answer any questions on the content. And we will bring, as I said, the most recent report. The timing of these committees and the timing of the reports doesn't always allow for the most recent report, as in this instance. June has just been published, but too late for the committee agenda, but we are circulating those reports.
Thank you. I have a question, Madam Chair. I see that building consents and resource consents continue to exceed expectations. So we have remained higher than the 4-year average for the past 4 months and have exceeded the yearly forecast. When we were developing Farm 2100, one of the objectives of that was to get an idea of where growth was happening in the district so we could be better prepared for it. Now that that project is not progressing in its original form, I guess it's a question for the Chief Executive, perhaps. What are we doing as an organisation to get a lens on where our growth pressures are occurring so we're ahead of the game in regard to pressures that might be coming on the infrastructure, sewage, pressures that might be coming on water, pressures that might be coming on roading, and then there's district facilities and community spaces, parks and reserved playgrounds. I'm mindful that there's anecdotal evidence, and it's only anecdotal evidence, that the great migration out of Auckland which was going to Tauranga, is now being priced out of the market, and now it's coming our way, with Whangarei now officially the fastest growing region in New Zealand. So when I see in here, and it seems to me that you guys are really pulling one out of the bag, just amazing that you're under this kind of pressure, and we have such great outcomes, but it's not letting up. And I'm just not sure we're really conscious of where it's all coming. Can I leave it at that?
I'm going to ask Darren to comment in a minute, but we've got 16 macro changes happening in our sector at the moment, which I think I've shared with the elected members at various stages. Councillor Rachel Smith introduced exactly this argument about a month ago, and that made the list for us. I mean, it's exactly as you've enunciated. We need to start getting our heads around where the pressures are on infrastructure in a long-term forecast. I don't think Darren would have got out of the blocks on this yet, but I'm just going to ask him if, because he and I have had a conversation, I'll just ask him if he's got anything planned at the moment or anything underway. Good, but it's certainly on our agenda.
Thanks, Sean. Through the Chair, it's a really good question that you raise, and something that I think will continue to be an opportunity for us. We could say that it's a struggle for us to keep up and identify. The fact is that it's an opportunity that we need to grasp, and we need to put some effort into identifying where those future growth nodes are. Fed 2100 has been out to public consultation, a piece of work that needs to come back to committee to work through what that consultation looks like. The district plan, through its review and its thinking about future growth for the far north, we've been working to identify how we allow those clashes of the need to protect the biodiversity and also the need for growth. You know, the speak that we are seeing coming out of the government at the moment, and we talked about this earlier this morning, is that there is the pace of change and the pace of funding being made available to the different sectors is happening so quickly that it's actually changing the landscape as we are trying to project where that growth looks like. So I'm not suggesting that it's an easy fix, but it's something that we're definitely aware of, and it is something that we continue to work on, and you will see us bringing some reports through to committee that can start to inform as to what the future may look like.
Thank you, and Dean may have further comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With the pressures on growth, there's, as Councillor Court has referred to, there's the pressure of migration out of Auckland and building and resource consent applications, etc. We expect another wave of applications with housing, and the whole housing initiative from and funding that's available now from central government through Kaingaora, Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, etc. As we see that coming through, we're expecting to see a new wave of consenting, and we want to continue working with Andy Finch and his team, and also with Darren, because there are different components to this. It's the district plan and all the changes that you were discussing this morning, the RMA reforms, which will change the way in which we manage our resource consents. And we are expecting that wave to hit, and resourcing certainly is an issue that we are discussing and looking at very closely. It will need a special effort to continue achieving the kinds of levels of compliance that we are able to at the moment. So yes, we certainly are mindful of that, and I'm sure there will be a joint report of sorts to different committees, perhaps it's the Strategic Planning Committee, and also through this committee to update the Infrastructure Committee. There's so many different facets to this that I think it's probably all of those committees at some point, but we certainly from a regulatory point of view will update.
Are there any other questions from members? I've got a few to raise. Oh, yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't have a question, just a note of appreciation for the level of information that's in there. Following on from a point that Councillor Court raised this morning, it would be great to see going forward perhaps some traffic lighting around the levels of service within there, so that it really stands out as to where we're punching above our weight and where we can be focusing on improvement. That would be really useful. I thought that there were some really cool good news stories within that report as well. So I just wanted to note my appreciation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So on page 44 of the agenda, infringements, and in October of last year, it shows one really large infringement. I don't want to know the who. I understand a higher fee is reflected by being a direct risk to health and safety, but what is a building compliance infringement that somebody would have had to pay a fine of nearly $10,000? Or is it lots of them in the month of October? Oh, there's Trent.
One for Trent, Madam Chair.
Yeah, Madam Chair, usually that equates to $1,000 infringement for breach of the Section 40 of the Building Act. That's usually the main one that we use.
What's that section?
Section 40.
Oh, sorry, but what?
Oh, so what that means is building without a building consent,
Oh,
or
sweet.
altering a house without a building consent in general terms. So that attracts a $1,000 fine.
Wow, and so there was possibly 9 of them in October, less over the next months, but it does seem to be quite high in the January and May as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. My other comment was around the resource consents. We managed to claw back 139k in resource consent fees. That was reflective of staff meeting the statutory time frame. That's excellent work, but I am still getting a lot of people complaining about extra costs that they're being charged, and I had a look at the fee schedule, and I think it just needs to be made explicitly clear that if people try to call a consultant or a planner Outside of that, they will be charged an invoice. And it's extra. It says in there that a consultant's fee is different, but it doesn't give an example of how different. So people are getting invoices around the scheme of $6,000 to $8,000 for ringing a consultant and trying to understand what the consultant has said. And they shouldn't be ringing it, but they see all of council's processes as a service. So, mum or dad developer rings a consultant thinking that they're just talking to customer services, that they're not going to get charged hundreds or thousands of dollars. Do you understand what I mean, Rochelle?
Madam Chair, so consultant, to get through the sheer number of applications that we are receiving, we have to put some applications out through to consultants. The hourly rate that consultants charge is the same as what council, if it was processed internally, so there is no difference to anyone if their consent has been, their application has gone through to a consultant or to an internal planner. So they can correspond with those consultants, which would be at the same cost as what it would be to an internal planner.
Sorry, not a planner, an engineer.
Oh, engineer?
Yeah.
That would be the same as well. As our consultant engineers' fees would be the same as what our internal engineers' fees would be.
So they can just push back on it then, because $8,000 invoice is quite excessive.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I may comment, we charge for services rendered, so whether that's through a consultant planner or an engineer or our own staff, we are finding that we are under recovering in some instances. So Rochelle is working with Cheryl Gavin to review fees and charges, and that will come separately, and we did consult on that as to whether we should do that as part of the LTP process, but we were advised that we could do that separately, so that will come later this year, probably around October time. We want to be sure that we are cost recovering, because the public-private goods split, when we talk about consents, who benefits? We are, as regulators, to ensure that the customer, the residents and ratepayers of this district, are getting a fair deal, and that something doesn't happen in a way that's going to cost them money, cost this council money, and that's fair and consistent. When the applicant pays for that service, it's not entirely rates funded. There's a private good component to that, and that will all be addressed as part of the fees and charges review. There are suggestions, strong suggestions, just from quick comparisons, that we are under recovering as compared to we're not charging as much as other councils do for the same services, and that needs to be addressed.
Yep, and we've got a report coming to us at September meeting or sometime this year.
Yes,
on
September,
item. My final comment on, just following on from what you said, on page 22, the funding breakdown for the district services group was, just reiterates what you were saying about the public good, or, how things are funded within this group. Rates versus use charges breakdown in that report is really helpful. But yeah, my final comment was around the impounded dogs for that month. 38 were impounded, 16 claimed, 5 went to rescue group, 7 were adopted. What happened to the other 10? It doesn't say.
It doesn't say. Rochelle might want to answer that, Madam Chair.
So any that aren't captured within that are either still held within the shelter for various reasons. So it could be that they're looking at investigations, prosecutions, those sorts of things. For any that are unclaimed and not able to be rehomed, there is a euthanasia component to that. To get a complete breakdown, because the 7 days can go across a couple of months in some times, and long-term holds can sort of be within that time if it's impounded and sort of across longer than the 9 days.
Okay, thanks for that, Rochelle. If
it might be helpful if it does give a further breakdown in future.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chair, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Oh, yes. Member Ward?
I just had one around, and I did ask Trent on the last report, around these notices to fix on page 43. I'm not sure what other, under the Building Act, the notices, it says not just for building work. But there was, it seems to be consistently growing, and I just wondered if that was due to the fact that people are just putting more plonkons on, and people are complaining, or whether you're actually out there monitoring and searching and looking for illegal works, and where the corresponding outcome is for that graph, like how many of those notices to fix are actually remedied, and what sort of time frame?
Chair, yes, that's correct. A lot of the notice to fixes actually come from VWAF audits that we do on people's buildings. That generates a lot of notice to fixes. I can probably add a component into the report that will tell us how many notice to fixes are satisfied in any given month. That would probably help in contrast to that. So it's not all bad news. But the good news of having that level of notice to fixes, it actually tells us they're out there doing our job. So that's the important thing. We're making sure our community's safe. So that's a good thing.
And the work that is not just building work, what does that relate to? It says here, it talks about breaches of the Act, not just for building work.
Yeah, so what that all means, there's several breaches, there's several reasons why we'd issue a notice to fix. I've mentioned one that's a breach in a VWAF audit. Perhaps someone hasn't got their VWAF, or they're not displaying it, or some such thing like that. There's breaches to the Building Act, which is the Section 40, which I spoke about with Madam Chair earlier. Another instance would be for a swimming pool now, because swimming pools are now, the compliance is under the F9 of the Building Act. So if we have a breach with a swimming pool, we can use a notice to fix as well.
Yeah, good, the breakdown would be great.
Cool.
Thank you.
Can I just make an observation? Certainly. When you were talking, and I was reflecting on that gentleman who spoke earlier. So here we have people that they're not setting out to break the law. They're driving unwarranted and unregistered cars because that's all they've got. And here we've got, I'm quite convinced that there's a lot of people out there are breaking the law because they can. But equally, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are breaking the law because they simply cannot afford compliance. And I guess I'm just hypothesising out loud that we talk with traffic about an enabling approach to get people into compliant vehicles. Do we have an enabling approach with people, you know, if you're really, really poor and you've got this much money and I can build a shelter and I can live in it, or I could pay my council fees and I'd have no money left to build my shelter, to live in it, and we catch them, do we work with them, or is it just a fine and a slap?
So through the chair, Councillor Court, look, that is the discretionary of a compliance officer. It's probably one of the single most hardest parts of the job, you know, because we see the full spectrum. We see people, I can think of an instance right now where a local affluent family is, you know, flaunting the law and building cabins and making money off them because they think they can, and that's not the case. So we've had to obviously issue fines to them. And on the other side of the ledger, you have someone who is, you know, on a very substandard building on a rural isolated block somewhere that's potentially had a complaint against it. And we have to go in there and sort out how we're going to gain some compliance with those people. And, you know, we don't rush in there with $1,000 fine at all. You know, we're trying to find an outcome that helps everyone. You know, that could mean getting onto a third-party service that could perhaps help them out, or just making sure it's safe and sanitary. You know, and sometimes that's all we can do. What we do have to do, though, is if someone has given a complaint, we have to try and satisfy that person's complaint as well. So that's the constant challenge.
Oh, it's nice to know you've got some discretion.
That raises one that I've really
would have liked to have brought up in PX, but I won't mention the customer. But when we use discretion to work with somebody that's going through a consent process, whether it be resus consent or I think it was a resus consent, sometimes interference or too much discretion can wind us up in environment court, can't it?
Madam Chair, yes, it's a balancing act, and we need to look at the interests of the community and residents and ratepayers at large at one level, and then the interests of the person, the applicant on the other, or the complainant on the other. It really depends. We can very easily end up in difficult situations. We take legal advice on a lot of issues that are complex, because we need to be sure that we aren't exposing council and the ratepayers essentially to costs that may fall to council. So yeah, we do take our time to consider very carefully what the issues are and how council should best respond, because that environment court, it's expensive. For some people, environment court is not an option because they can't afford it. For some deep pockets, they would gladly do that. And the other option we offer sometimes on the building side of things is for people to take their complaints to MB for a determination, because sometimes they believe we're wrong and they're right, and then we put it in the hands of someone independent to decide. And that can fall either way. It can say, "Hey, council, you got this wrong," or "Yes, complainant, you make a point, but you in this instance are wrong, are in the wrong." So yes, we weigh things up, and we do offer Office of the Ombudsman is another one. We have directed people who have stuck to their guns and believe that they have a point and that we've got it wrong. We've sometimes referred people to Office of the Ombudsman, and more often than not, on balance, they make a call, and I must say they have found it in our favour in many instances. So yeah, there are many options, and we do work with people to explore those.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any other questions? Okay, we have a mover and seconder. I'll put that information in report. All those in favour? Aye. Okay, thank you very much. Good discussion on the report. So now we have item 5.2, and there is a recommendation. I'm going to hold the recommendation while we have some discussion around it, and we'll be led by the room. What? Does anybody want to start? No.
Madam Chair, if staff will be willing to speak to the report first.
Yes, we do have through Jamie.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I'll just introduce it before I hand it over to Rochelle and Minnie Fox, who's one of our planners who can speak in some detail to the flora and fauna aspect. We, as planners, have a task to weigh up all the information presented by an applicant, and there are various rules within the district plan that we work to, and that those are all considered in the process of deciding on whether an application for resource consent is notified or not. I'll stop there, Madam Chair, and hand to Minnie, who could speak much more eloquently on these matters than I can.
Thank you.
Welcome, Minnie.
Thank you. So yes, when we receive an application for a resource consent, we have to consider the activity status, the type of proposal, and then from there we have to consider not only the assessment criteria, but objectives and policies in the district plan, as well as all higher order documents depending on the activity status. So all of those things lead us towards a decision. Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions? Elected members?
Well, a quick question. So obviously this is work that you're doing, so we had a discussion in the previous committee early on about going forward under the new SNA. So you are working under the old regulations, I take it, currently when you're going through all of this? Yep.
Yes. current district plan.
Thank you. That's good. That just clarifies a few things. I expect it was the case.
Yes, Councillor Smith. Thank you, Madam Chair. Tēnā koe mani. Thank you for presenting the report. In the, I guess, reflecting on the conversation that we had this morning around what Councillor Vucic just brought up, the NPSIB and Indigenous biodiversity through our district plan, and balancing that with the deputation that we've received this afternoon from Leonie, who has brought up some really relevant questions. I guess balance is the word that's in my mind continuously. And I think what this report has highlighted for me, and thank you, Leonie, for really reiterating that, is how easily balance can be tipped either way without really a clear indication of what balance needs to look like. And we're seeing that with I can't remember how many moving targets we've got coming at us from central government at the moment, but those scales are continuously being tipped, and we're losing the opportunity to define what balance looks like on behalf of our communities. So I'm just wondering if there's any response to, Minnie, you can't see the questions there, but I know that you were here for the deputation this morning, to the points that Leonie has raised in her deputation and how we might be able to look at what that balance looks like going forward. We do need to ensure that we're protecting our biodiversity, our flora and our fauna, especially our kiwi being so strongly treasured across the country, but we also need to make sure that we balance that with the growth that we're seeing, that we're continuously responding to, and understanding with FN 2100 at the back of our mind and wanting to look 80 years ahead, where does this kaupapa fit into that kaupapa and where we're projecting ongoing. So it's a very roundabout question. Apologies. Please feel free to interpret it in your own way, but if you had a response, that would be great.
So many aspects to discuss. I just wrote down the questions, so I'm just going to grab them. Sorry, I quickly wrote them down. So, Madam Chair, your first question about balance. When it comes to the current district plan, our balance relates to objectives and policies, which come from the RMA. So Part 2 tells us national importance, significant Indigenous biodiversity vegetation, it's up there. That comes down into the regional policy statement, which has been determined in 2016. And from there, it's in our objectives and policies, which we have to follow. So our balance is not determined by, we look at each application independently, but we also have to make sure that we're consistent by making sure we follow those objectives and policies all the way through. So we couldn't get an application where somebody said to us, I want to do this subdivision, and I think it's totally appropriate for there to be dogs, and us disregard everything and say that's fine. We have to take into account everything that comes with the district plan. So a couple of questions that Leonie had. The extent of the ban limitations was her first one. That I couldn't say. I've been working here for a number of years and we've got records, but I wouldn't be able to go through all of them. But the extent of our bans relates to subdivisions predominantly. So when a subdivision comes in, we review the application, we look at the kiwi zoning, but not just the kiwi zoning. We also look at whether there's vegetation on the site in proximity, whether there's dockland in proximity that requires us to take into account. We look at ecological corridors, riparian management. Is there any sort of method for any flora or fauna to move? So we're not just thinking about kiwi. Kiwi are just we call them keystone species. So they help us assess the vegetation and its ability to survive. So we're using kiwi as our indicator species to help us know what needs protecting and what doesn't. And the kiwi mapping tells us if, for example, it's kiwi high, that there's a good level of vegetation there that should be protected because kiwi can live in it. So when we're looking at subdivision, we're looking at does does this application have an impact on that vegetation and the flora and fauna that live in it? Yeah. If you have any questions as I speak, please feel free to, sorry. With regards to the cost of legal battles, I couldn't speak to, and the rates remissions, again, I couldn't speak to. They are outside of the district plan and the resource consent process. How reliable is doc information was the full question that I got down. Doc information, so Kiwi maps have been running since 1990 something, so 96, thank you. And they are changed only on a 5-year basis for review. And in those 5 years, a new zone is not created or changed from Kiwi present to Kiwi high unless the numbers of Kiwi have been consistent in that zone for over the 5 years. So these aren't maps that are changed every year or expanded without any data behind them. Additionally, the maps are created from Kiwi call counts, which are done as a volunteer basis. So because they're volunteer basis, there is lots of spots in them because there's areas where where DOC doesn't have volunteers. And those are areas where we call data deficient. So there may be Kiwi, there may not be, we don't know. Similarly, in Kiwi present areas, there is listening stations, but they may not be that well heard. Or in Kiwi high areas, there may be more than it is accounted for, but again, we haven't heard them. And then all of that translates into those Kiwi maps, and that is then released to the public. So we don't use those maps from DOC with their information. We use the maps as a static mapping system. So they influence our decisions on the basis of, is there significant flora and fauna in the area that requires protection from a subdivision or an application provided to us, but they don't have weighting in that we say the information is from DOC, therefore it has a higher weighting than any other information we have present. And Kiwi maps are not the only maps we use. So we have mapping on mudfish. I understand there's other mapping happening, such as bat mapping. When that information is available, we will use it, but we don't have it at this moment of time. We also use land care groups and their pest control area group mapping, and that's provided to us by Kiwi Coast. Impacts and consequences of the bans, that's a very large topic. There is impacts and there is consequences, there's positives and negatives, and the job of a planner is to balance those. So we have to take into account the economic gain, the health and well-being of a person, their property, their future goals, as well as the environment and the ecology of the area and what impact a subdivision will have in the area. When we consider banning a dog or a cat, it's not just about the Kiwi, it's about the potential to damage habitat or the flora and fauna that's in it. So it's the lizards as well, and the skinks, and our Kiwi. I'm unaware of how our practice note may clash with other practice notes or policy council. I do understand that the dog control policy has no limitations on dogs. The reason limitations are placed on consent conditions and consent notices is because it's easier for us to enforce. And we also have research that states certain types of working dogs per hectare is appropriate. So a 164 hectare property, we may impose a consent notice that says working dogs are allowed. which means you can have any number of working dogs because it's an active farm. Whereas a farm that is less than 4 hectares in size doesn't require 6 dogs to be run. It doesn't even need 2 necessarily. So we take into account the type of land it is and what it's being used for and what it will be used for in the future when we impose those bans. We also consider grandfather clausing, where if there is an existing dog or cat on site, we do make sure that they're catered for the rest of their life. And then the consent condition or notice comes into effect. Other options, fencing, advocacy, pest management are all considered. There are also all options that we do consider when imposing conditions, and quite often stop-proof fencing is required. Pest management is something that we do condition on. So it's not that it's just cats and dogs. It's everything is considered on in a balanced manner. Madam Chair.
Wow, thank you very much for those responses, Minnie. And I haven't met you before. You're doing an amazing job. Councillor Smith.
Tautoko, Madam Chair. That was fantastic. Thank you, Minnie, to be able to go through that. I think what's become really clear to me is this is another situation where we as a council are ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but unfortunately the opportunities at the top of the cliff are not being fully utilised, which is why it's getting to the bottom of the cliff. Everything at the top of the cliff is not necessarily within our mandate, such as the fencing and the predator-free promotion and all of those activities that DOC and NRC and all of our other organisations could be doing to ensure that they're playing their part as well. And Madam Chair, I would love to sit here today and say, right, this is what we're going to do to move forward with this, but my brain doesn't work that quickly, especially after this morning. So I think that this is a further conversation for us to continue at this committee level as to how we can use our advocacy and our voice, and not only this kaupapa, but all of the kaupapa that we're the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff right now, and say, you know what, this is the part that we play, but in a partnership, everybody has to understand their role and their responsibility and stand up to that. And we don't feel that that's necessarily a fair partnership at the moment. So, Madam Chair, I take your guidance as to how we can best progress that. And I know that there was some information that Minnie, you're not able to answer right now, and I wouldn't expect you to, because it's very data heavy and very data orientated, and that's our job, is to make decisions based on data. So I think that that's a future piece of work that we need to be looking at going forward. But I'd love to take this opportunity to have a further conversation about what that balance looks like. It's not about ensuring that we put one species above another, it's simply just understanding, as Leanne pointed out, the impacts when we do one or the other, and figuring out where those scales need to sit. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any other comments from elected members? So we haven't moved the recommendation. Perhaps we'll consider the recommendation and that the committee, that council has a workshop on this issue with a further report to a future reg committee. What do you reckon? Or can we have an adjournment so I can use the bathroom and we can discuss some wording? Adjourned. Thank you, Madam Chair.
advice.
And the agent, yeah. So I think sometimes there's unfair criticism that's leveled at, to the wrong place.
Okay, so we have a recommendation from the paper. Do we have a
Rather than a workshop.
amended recommendation? Suggested amended recommendation is that the Regulatory Compliance Committee receive the report significant flora and fauna assessment and that a briefing be held to address both the operative and draft proposed district plan provisions as they are applied as part of resource consent considerations and practices.
Chair, are you going to move that?
Before I ask for a mover, can we just have an explanation of that?
Chair, in discussion with my learned colleague Darren Edwards, we decided that a workshop, there are so many workshops, that a briefing may be more appropriate if the committee agrees, that someone like Greg Wilson or someone from Greg's team, district plan team, together with our team, the resource consents team, bring a considered approach as part of a briefing to inform you as a committee on this topic and elaborate a lot more than what we've touched on today. That may assist you as the committee to then consider the way forward, because there are a lot of variables. The new RMA reforms are on their way, or underway. The new district plan is being worked through at the moment, and once that's notified, then we effectively have two district plan, two versions of the district plan that our resource consent planners will have to work under. Also, I can't tell you at this point how many submissions were made specifically on the district plan, the draft, the new district plan, on this very topic, and that would be useful information I would suggest as well. So to bring more information to you as a committee to elaborate on what you've heard today, I believe will help inform future decisions on this matter.
And yes, Member Ward?
I just want to ask why would you have the operative plan in there?
That's the existing, the current.
Yes, but it has to be worked with, so why would you have a briefer to address the operative plan?
The application of the operative district plan. So in other words, we practice what you heard today from from Minnie is we have planners who work according to the district plan, current, and they'll be working to the future operative draft. And there'll be an in-between period of draft notification and consultation on that draft. So in fact, their job becomes even more complex because they'll be working to two sets of rules for a period. And within that, it's how they interpret and apply the district plan rules, which brings a decision for notification or non-notification. I think the value lies in having both perspectives, hearing from the policy team, Greg's team, and also from the district plan team, and also from the people who interpret and apply those rules in their considerations.
Your concern? I thought that was a given, sorry, that they would have to take away the vote once the proposed one comes in place, but anyway.
I think it's more to benefit for the learnings, for everybody to benefit from the learnings, I guess. You have to look backwards in order to look forwards. So as we're in the opportunity of the draft proposed district plan, how do we make sure, as well as is it a section 32, Darren, I think, where the learnings from the district plan have been taken, but when we get more specific into this side of things, how do we look at that in order to look forward? I'm in full support of this. Once I understood what it meant, it took me a minute, but.
And with a date to come back to this committee? Madam Deputy Mayor? It's going to call you Madam.
I'm concerned about how many times as a committee we receive a report and then we move an amendment expanding on the role that we want the staff to fill. So we had a really good session this morning, and we are mindful that with SNAs and heritage areas and all of those other things, our district plan team are really under the pump, and we want them to get up there and consult with everybody. Notwithstanding the merits of everything that I've heard this morning, what do we hope to achieve by having a briefing? So I come back to what I said before. I don't think my role is to write the district plan. Not my job to write the Building Act. But as an advocate, as an elected representative, I believe my job is advocacy. So we've had a deputation today from Ms. Excel on the issue of dogs and cat bans and restrictions, and she's posed 6 questions there, and I think they need to be considered. Equally though, I want governance comfort that other views, opposing views, are considered and a balanced position is arrived at. So I do understand the passion to be all things to all people and be all over every arm of this council. But we are all time constrained and our staff are time constrained, so I don't want to create more work for the sake of creating more work. I would be much happier to receive, Maria, what are we looking at? I would be much happier.
I'm getting tired, my eye is
sorry. A report, apologies. I'd be much happier to receive a report and to record. Is there any truth to the fact that we are developing to such a degree that we're making dog and cat ownership untenable in this district? I hear it, but I'd like some empirical evidence to underpin that. I also heard that fencing was an option. So in that case, why could someone not live in a zone if they had a 6-foot fence around their property where their dog could not escape into the adjoining protected Indigenous area? And we know that if they're out there on a leash. So I heard you, Minnie, say that there were rules such as fencing. So I'm just a bit concerned that we don't try and reinvent the wheel. I don't believe that's our job. I just want governance comfort that a fair and equitable process is happening at a staff level.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Councillor
Message.
Yeah, what Councillor Corsano, I agree with that, and that at that governance level that we've got the comfort that that's been happening. So the key thing is probably not just getting another session there, but given how we're implementing it and what we're doing or how we are creating the conditions, I'd be keen to know that all of the concerns that have been voiced and we've heard, like those questions, can to be answered, and then we get an idea of just what's happening. So I agree with Councillor Court. It'd be nice to actually get feedback on that, and that's probably what we can do. And any other things we may want to raise at the time. I wouldn't mind raising, as a previous speaker that was here, talked about technology, and there's technology available too. So what are the sort of things that staff are looking at just to get that comfort that's been looking considered?
So are we looking at landing on B, or are we looking at a different B that says and further report with data presented? No? What do you? Yes, Member Ward?
I'm still a little confused, sorry for belabouring the point, but you know, you're talking about the district plans, but you're not really addressing covenants put on by subdividers, which will override all the conditional district plan, which will come in on the PIN as well, if they do their homework. So I think my personal experience is a lot of the problems that are arising out of complaints to myself and within certain areas, particularly in our Leyland-Swangold area, is covenants, the amount of subdivisions that are covenanted, and some of them heavily covenanted to the point where maybe they can't put water tanks and things like that. So if people have a cat-free or pet-free covenant on their subdivision, that is something that's not going to be captured in either the operative or the proposed district plan provisions. So I'm just not quite sure, I'm not convinced that that's actually going to solve anything by having a briefing on that. But
Dean is offering that a further report.
I'm thinking, Madam Chair, a joint report as suggested, briefing. We started off with the idea of a workshop, but I think there's so many workshops. A briefing, a report a further report would bring together a lot of examples and statistics, for you, which inform how we achieve the balance. Because Forest and Bird, if they were making a submission here today to this committee, they'd be telling you a whole lot of things, different things that, they see and are very passionate about. So how do we as a council, through the planning process, how do we achieve that balance? And a lot of the answers to that lie in how we interpret the existing and apply the existing operative plan, and then some of the changes that are coming and submissions that have been made to the new draft plan. So I'm thinking there may be some value in a joint report with Greg Wilson, with the district plan team.
Should we change
to
that to
provide you with that sense of, are we achieving balance or not at this point? And in the future, that may become a lot more complex, but are we achieving for the life of this plan and for the foreseeable future, are we achieving the balance that is required, that achieves fairness to everyone, for everyone?
B reads now that a joint report be presented to address both the operative and draft proposed district plan provisions as they're applied as part of the resource consent considerations and practices. Does that capture covenants though from private property developers? No. So provisions and private property covenants. Rochelle, thank you.
Madam Chair, we can't report on private covenants.
Oh, I was going to say.
Madam Chair, I just want to support the points that Dean has raised. My question initially was, the intent was to give me governance comfort as to how we were achieving balance through our district plan going forward by looking at the balance that we've had in the district plan going backwards. So I feel really comfortable that this will achieve that from a governance point of view, and I just really wanted to reiterate that. If Dean feels that a joint report is the best way to do it, I was happy with a briefing, knowing that we were going to be moving into district plan briefings over the next few months anyway. However, if it's felt that a joint report is the best way to achieve that, I'm happy to move that in the interest of.
Okay.
Madam Chair, can I ask a technical question then? Quite often a developer will request a no cat and dog covenant, and it's not our district plan that is compelling them to do that. It is their choice to do that. Is there a way to identify whether there is a challenge within our district plan per se, or there is a challenge out there in the market? I know that's a really loaded question and you might not be able to answer it.
I think it's the opportunity to report perhaps on trends or the frequency of occurrence of covenants or aspects that introduce a layer of complexity for planners when they are considering a resource consent application. So it's bringing to you some kind of sense, some sense of how frequently does this occur, how do covenants impact the decision to go one way or another, on what basis, how frequently do we have these instances of direct impacts on animal lovers, dogs and cats, versus the other argument on the other side of the equation as to Forest and Bird saying, well, or DOC for that matter, saying that we have particular interests in, and they are, whether they are identified as interested parties or not, because that's part of what our planners do. They decide who's impacted and who's likely to be an interested party. And then there's the opportunity through notification for comment and submissions. So if we can bring you a sense of that, I mean, I certainly, and I'm sure Darren doesn't want to create layers of extra work for our staff, but I think they know quite intuitively, they know what those trends look like and how frequently these things come to the fore, and therefore they'd be able to provide you with a good summary sense of how often these things happen and how we would consider them, or how we believe we should consider them.
Thank you. I am, notwithstanding the merits of the debate, Madam Chair, I am incredibly concerned about the staff workload at the moment. And I'd be more comfortable if this debate was held next year after the district plan was notified, because I just know that they're completely under the pump at the moment. But if their general manager is saying they can do this, I get comfort from them.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Chair, can I suggest we vote on that in two parts?
Thank you. We have a recommendation. We'll vote on it in two parts. That's A, we received the report significant flora and fauna assessment, and we'll have vote by division, please. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. And that B, that everybody? That was everybody. That a joint report be presented to address both the operative and draft proposed district plan provisions as they are applied as part of resource consent considerations and practices. And all those in favour?
Do you vote by division?
Yes, please. All those in favour?
Take it easy, Dolly. Come on, guys, put your hands up.
Aye.
So, thank you.
And against?
Aye, against me.
Carried, I can't hear. That's carried, Amy. Thank you very much. And do we have to put it all as a no? We don't. Okay. Thank you. Okay, that is put to bed. Yes, we did. Yep, that's fine. We've got Thank you, Councillor Smith, for staying for that one.
We won't drive too fast.
Okay, now the next item is, oh, I'm looking at the wrong agenda. 5.3, recommendation is that the Regulatory Compliance Committee receive a report GCA compliance update. I'll move. Second. Councillor Court second, thank you. And we have Trent Blakeman in the room with us today. And there is fancy presentation.
Oh, no pressure.
No pressure. I've got a very short one, to be honest, to be fair. End of the financial year, obviously, and I gather if you've all read the district services report, you've probably had all the good information anyway. So we've all cycled through that. So it's a wrap. We look at the figures there. We talk about the consents received for the year. They were well and above what we forecasted for. Sort of talk to the question you raised before about resource and development. I think it's very much a crystal ball situation at the moment. Embry predicted, I was thinking we're going into a downturn because we were sort of due, but COVID's interrupted all that and done weird things to, I think, probably the worldwide economy, would be a fair comment. Supplies, builders are busy, but they can't get products. You know, we're getting a lot of amendments for different products because they're having to change them out because they're not available. So that's affecting that. So who knows what's going to happen. If I could have the next slide, please. So the next, if you look at the pink line, that's our 2021 consents received per month. As you can see, from January until June of this year, well above the average of last year and well above the averages for the last 4 years. So, you know, the BCR, I've got to give a rap for the team here. They've done exceptionally well to keep ahead of the consent numbers that we've had come in. So it's a very good effort from them. Next slide, please. And the good news is, as you can see, we've got 99.26% compliance for the year. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. Yeah, so we're very happy. Next slide, please. The CCCs, obviously we've got a little bit of work to do, but still a very good result at 98.87. I'm pretty sure this financial year we'll get a higher number than that. Next slide, please. Room for questions. Wow. That's it. Very short and sweet.
Sean Clark memo. Get Trent to write all the staff reports.
It's easy when it's good news.
Okay, questions from members of the committee? Oh, they're all exhausted.
So, no, I just think that's an outstanding achievement. And it is important that we recognise that as achievements. We're really, really good when things aren't going right, complaining going around. But I think it's also important that we please find something our congratulations to what is a standard thing. Dr. D.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the team's done tremendously well, and I want to just acknowledge Trent's leadership in that. He's done an amazing job and continues to do so. So we've got a few things ahead of us. The building compliance check that INBI is doing, Trent's leading that at the moment. We've just been asked for some information on that, so we'll report on the outcome of that. And in October, we're doing an IANS assessment, not an audit, but we voluntarily agreed to subject ourselves again to an assessment, and we'll see what comes from that. But the purpose of that, the focus of that, is to hold up a mirror, see whether the outsider looking in view confirms for us what we believe we are doing, and that's right up there. And it's the best way, we believe, Trent and I have discussed this many times, of how we keep ahead of the game and keep things on track. So we'll be providing further reports to you of the outcomes of those assessments.
Excellent, and it'll be really reflective of practice that is in place every day now, not just...
That's the challenge. Needs to be a habit,
yes,
is what we're looking for.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Anybody have any building consent questions for Trent? Thank you.
We had a whole lot of building consent questions, and I brought a team along, and Trent did a really good job. So thank you for that.
That's excellent. Okay, all those in favour? Aye. Okay, our next item, 5.4, the recommendation is that the Regulatory Compliance Committee receive the report action sheet update July 2021. And I'll have a mover. Award, Councillor Research, thank you very much. Anybody wish to raise anything about the action sheet?
Madam Chair, well, same as what Councillor Court did raise before. Some of those items probably didn't need to be there. Anyway. Otherwise, no.
Well, I think the date of the March one, yeah, we've had that update on legislation, haven't we? So that's completed. We've actioned the parking enforcement services. Okay. There was also a copy of our work program sent out to you as an attachment. Not yet, sorry. Carried. Sorry, all those in favour of carrying the action sheet, thank you very much. Awesome. Did we have, I don't have a copy of it in front of me. Oh, thank you very much. So, just for our next meeting, which is 7th of September, we'll have our quarterly DLA alcohol licensing report, noise control, parking enforcement, and is the dog one later in the year, Rochelle? Oh yeah, it's in November, sweet, okay. October, oh yes, certainly.
Madam Chair, I believe that was updated since that time, that we brought forward a report where we were to do a year review of resource consents, and also bring in section 10A annual report for dog.
Excellent, thank you, I thought it was September. Yeah, cool, fabulous. So we've got a big agenda next time.
we're not dealing with this today.
Did you have things you wanted to add to it?
No, I just had a few queries and things, but they can get talking this meeting.
No, we can do it once I close the meeting if you want, sort of out of. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. That was quite a long meeting, but we had a couple of important items that we needed to consider, and we will hear back again to address the concerns raised by the dog and cat advocates and our whangatira from Moeroa. Just keeping in the back of our mind what the enforcement means for some of our less affluent communities is really important. So that was really good that he came along to address us, and I, in hindsight, should have got him to come along to speak to us on that. Thank you. I will close our meeting with a karakia.
Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whaia ko tātou ariki, me te aroha, te atua, me te pipinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Tracy, could you end the live stream, please?